Before you can understand anyone else, before you can measure the value of another person's presence in your life, you must first confront the most important question you will ever ask: who am I? Too often, people rush into relationships, partnerships, or alliances while carrying only a surface-level understanding of themselves. They focus on the image they want to project, not the truth of who they really are. They are quick to ask what others bring to the table without ever examining what they themselves bring. But if you don't know your own worth, your own purpose, your own limits and strengths, then no matter how powerful, wealthy, or charming another person is, you will always be at a disadvantage. Knowing who you are is the foundation for respect, for influence, and for lasting authority. When you know yourself, you are unshakable. Life will throw storms. People will try to define you. Society will attempt to box you into labels, but none of that matters when your identity is carved into your very being. It is like building a fortress. The stronger the foundation, the harder it is to be broken. Most people collapse not because they are weak, but because they built their lives on borrowed identities, on borrowed values, on borrowed dreams. They did not create their own blueprint. And when the weight of life pressed down on them, they crumbled because their foundation was never theirs to begin with. To know who you are, you must strip away illusions. That means facing your fears, your flaws, your scars, and your insecurities without shame. You must be willing to ask hard questions. What do I stand for? What am I willing to fight for? What am I willing to sacrifice? What am I unwilling to compromise on? These questions are not meant to make you comfortable. They are meant to make you honest. Because clarity is uncomfortable, truth is heavy. But when you know the answers, you carry yourself differently. You no longer beg for validation because you have validated yourself. You no longer chase attention because your presence commands it. Power begins with self-awareness. People think power comes from money, from connections, or from influence. But true power is internal. It is the unshakable knowledge of self. Think about it. If you do not know your values, you can be bought. If you do not know your purpose, you can be distracted. If you do not know your strengths, you can be manipulated. But when you know who you are, you become untouchable. People can try to influence you, but they cannot control you. They can offer you the world, but they cannot buy your soul. They can challenge you, but they cannot break your core. That is the essence of strength. Too many people spend their lives asking, "Who is he? What does he have? What can he give me?" But if you don't know who you are, none of that matters. If you don't know your own worth, then someone else's worth will always overshadow you. And here is the truth: when you don't know yourself, you will always settle. You will settle for less than you deserve, settle for people who don't respect you, settle for a life that does not reflect your potential. Because when you are blind to your own value, you accept whatever is handed to you. Knowing yourself changes everything. It changes the way you walk into a room. It changes the way people treat you. It changes the way you respond to challenges. When you have self-knowledge, confidence radiates from you without effort. You no longer need to tell people you are strong. They see it. You no longer need to demand respect. They feel it. You no longer need to chase recognition. It follows you. This is the difference between someone who is searching for identity and someone who has already found it. Ask yourself this: do you know your mission? Not your job, not your role, not what others expect from you, but your mission. Do you know your principles? Not the rules you were taught, but the code you choose to live by. Do you know your essence? Not the image on social media, not the mask you put on for others, but the raw version of yourself that exists when nobody is watching. Until you know these things, you will always look outward for answers that can only be found inward. The truth is, the moment you stop asking, "Who is he?" and start asking, "Who am I?" is the moment you begin to build authority. It is the moment you stop chasing and start leading. It is the moment people look at you and recognize a force that cannot be ignored. Self-knowledge is not arrogance. It is not ego. It is clarity. And clarity is magnetic. People are drawn to those who know themselves because it is rare. Most people are wandering through life, lost in the noise, distracted by comparison, shaped by the opinions of others. But when you walk with the weight of self-awareness, you separate yourself, you rise above, you become the standard by which others measure themselves. And here's what you must understand: when you know who you are, you will never lower yourself for anyone. You will never beg to be chosen. You will never allow disrespect, because your identity, your dignity, and your purpose are not negotiable. They are the crown you wear, and no one can take it from you. That crown is not handed to you. It is forged in the fire of self-discovery, in the silence of self-reflection, and in the courage of self-acceptance. Knowing who you are is not the first step. It is the only step that determines whether every other step will matter. There is a dangerous mistake that too many people make when it comes to relationships, partnerships, and connections. They spend all their energy analyzing the other person, his behavior, his words, his intentions, while neglecting the most vital foundation of all, themselves. They ask, who is he? What does he bring? Can I trust him? But they rarely pause to ask, who am I? What do I bring? Can I be trusted with my own destiny? Before you measure another person's value, you must first measure your own. Before you define him, you must define yourself. Because if you do not know who you are, you will always be at risk of losing yourself in someone else's story. Knowing yourself is not about labels or surface-level identity. It is about peeling back the layers until you face the truth of your existence. It is about going deeper than your name, your title, your achievements, or your image. Those are external decorations, but they do not define you. Who you are goes beyond your resume, beyond your status, beyond what society says about you. It is rooted in your principles, your vision, your strengths, your weaknesses, and the values that guide your decisions. If you do not know these things, then you are standing on shaky ground, and shaky ground cannot hold a throne. People who do not know themselves often fall into the trap of comparison. They look at what others have and feel inferior. They measure their worth against someone else's possessions, appearance, or charisma. But this comparison is a symptom of a deeper issue: lack of self-awareness. When you truly know yourself, comparison loses its grip on you. You are no longer distracted by what others are doing, because you are rooted in what you are becoming. And when that root runs deep, no storm, no man, no opinion can shake you. Why is this important before asking who he is? Because if you don't know yourself, you will project your insecurities onto him. You will misinterpret his actions through the lens of your own confusion. You will either put him on a pedestal or drag him into your own chaos, not because of who he truly is, but because you are unclear about who you are. Without self-knowledge, you cannot see others clearly. Your vision is clouded, your judgment is distorted, and your choices are compromised. Think about this: when you do not know who you are, you become easy to manipulate. You can be flattered into submission. You can be intimidated into silence. You can be convinced to betray your own values for the sake of approval. This is why knowing yourself is not just self-help, it is self-defense. It is protection. It is armor. And without it, you will always be vulnerable to being controlled by the stronger personality in the room. Knowing who you are also defines the standard of how you are treated. People treat you based on the cues you give them. If you walk in uncertainty, you invite disrespect. If you walk in desperation, you invite exploitation. But if you walk in clarity, if you walk in dignity, if you walk with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their value, then you command respect without ever demanding it. You don't need to argue for your worth. Your presence declares it. And this is where power is born. When you know yourself, you no longer chase validation. You no longer beg for recognition. You no longer cling to people who do not value you. Instead, you stand in your own authority. And from that position, you can evaluate others without desperation, without fear of being alone, without the illusion that someone else can complete you. You are already whole. You are already complete. So when you ask who he is, it is not from a place of need, but from a place of choice. That difference between need and choice is everything. A person who does not know themselves seeks completion in others. They cling, they compromise, they tolerate what they should never accept. But a person who knows themselves does not seek completion. They seek alignment. They are not desperate for company. They are selective about who deserves to enter their world. They are not impressed by shallow promises. They are guided by the consistency of actions. This is the difference between a ruler and a follower, between a queen and a servant. Self-knowledge also gives you direction. If you do not know who you are, you cannot know where you are going. And if you do not know where you are going, you will follow anyone who looks like they have a plan. That is dangerous because not every leader is worthy and not every path is meant for you. When you know yourself, you choose your path deliberately. You choose your companions wisely. You choose your destiny consciously. Without that awareness, you risk wandering aimlessly, attaching yourself to people who only delay or destroy your purpose. So the question is not first, who is he? The question is, who am I? Do I know my mission? Do I know my standards? Do I know my strengths? Do I know my weaknesses? Do I know what I deserve? Because once you answer those questions, the second question becomes easy. You will see him for who he truly is, not for who you hope he might be. You will no longer be blinded by charm, fooled by empty promises, or swayed by appearances. Instead, you will measure him against the ruler of your own self-knowledge. That is the power of knowing who you are before asking who he is. It allows you to see clearly, choose wisely, and stand firmly in the authority of your own identity. The greatest tragedy in human connection is not that people deceive you. It is that you deceive yourself by entering situations without clarity about your own identity. Too often, people rush to study the other person, his habits, his likes, his background, his goals, without first mastering the mirror. They want to know his story, but they have not even written their own. They want to evaluate his worth, but they have not established their own value. This is why so many end up feeling lost, disrespected, and diminished. The truth is simple. If you don't know who you are, you will always lose yourself in the shadow of someone else. To know who you are is to establish an unshakable foundation. Imagine a building. If the foundation is weak, no matter how tall or beautiful the structure appears, it will eventually collapse under pressure. Relationships, careers, partnerships, all of them follow the same principle. If you have not secured the ground beneath you, everything else will crumble when challenges arise. That foundation is self-awareness. Without it, you cannot stand strong in the face of manipulation, rejection, or uncertainty. When you ask, who is he? Before asking, who am I? You place yourself at a disadvantage. You position yourself to adapt to his standards instead of living by your own. You risk shaping yourself around what he wants, what he likes, and what he demands, instead of standing as a complete, independent force. This is why so many lose their identity in relationships. They never truly knew themselves to begin with. They thought they would discover themselves through him, but instead they dissolved into him. Knowing who you are begins with defining your principles. Principles are not trends. They are not moods. They are the laws you live by regardless of circumstance. If honesty is a principle for you, then you do not bend it when lying feels convenient. If respect is a principle for you, then you do not compromise it when silence would be easier. When you have principles, you have boundaries. And when you have boundaries, you have dignity. Without them, you are like clay in someone else's hands, easily molded into whatever shape they prefer. Strength flows from identity. When you know yourself, you are no longer desperate for validation. You are not begging to be chosen because you have already chosen yourself. You are not begging for approval because you have already approved of yourself. This strength makes you untouchable. It makes you magnetic. It makes people step back and recognize that they cannot manipulate you, cannot cheapen you, cannot treat you as ordinary. Respect becomes automatic, not because you demand it, but because your self-knowledge leaves no room for anything less. Consider the alternative. If you do not know who you are, every word he speaks has the power to shape your belief. Every compliment he gives feels like oxygen, and every criticism feels like destruction. You live on the highs of his approval and the lows of his disapproval. That is not love, nor is it respect. That is dependence. And dependence is weakness. But when you are anchored in who you are, his words may inspire you, but they do not define you. His criticism may challenge you, but it cannot shake you. His absence may hurt, but it will not break you. This is why asking, who am I? First is not selfish, it is survival. It ensures that when you do look at him, you see clearly. You are not blinded by your own insecurity. You are not trying to make him your source of identity. You are evaluating him through the lens of strength, not weakness. You are not searching for someone to complete you. You are searching for someone to align with you. There is a massive difference between the two. Completion implies you were broken. Alignment means you were whole and chose wisely. Knowing yourself also protects your future. Without clarity of self, you risk building your life around someone else's dream. You adopt his goals, his vision, his lifestyle, while your own desires shrink into silence. Years later, you wake up resenting him, not because he stole your life, but because you never claimed your own. But when you know yourself, your future is non-negotiable. You enter connections not to abandon your purpose, but to amplify it. You bring your mission to the table and demand that any partnership aligns with it. The truth is, knowing yourself is the highest form of respect you can give to any relationship, because when you bring clarity, you eliminate confusion. When you bring identity, you eliminate dependency. When you bring strength, you eliminate weakness. You no longer waste time pretending, adapting, or shrinking. You walk in authenticity. You walk in power. And from that position, when you finally ask, "Who is he?" you are not asking from a place of need, but from a place of abundance. You are not desperate for him to be everything. You are discerning about whether he is worthy of anything. That is the secret most never realize. You cannot truly see someone else until you have truly seen yourself. If you do not know your own light, you will mistake someone else's shadow for illumination. If you do not know your own strength, you will confuse control for protection. If you do not know your own value, you will accept treatment far beneath what you deserve. But when you know who you are, you see truth clearly. You measure him not by the illusions of charm or status, but by the reality of his character, his consistency, and his alignment with your destiny. One of the greatest mistakes people make is rushing to define others while leaving themselves undefined. They want to know his character, his ambition, his loyalty, his vision, but they have not yet confronted those same questions within themselves. They place so much attention on dissecting who he is that they fail to realize the most important foundation of all, their own identity. Before you can ever evaluate another, you must first evaluate yourself. Before you can ever measure his worth, you must establish your own. This is not arrogance, this is alignment. Because when you do not know who you are, every interaction, every relationship, every decision will be built on unstable ground. Knowing who you are is not simply about stating your name or your role. It goes deeper. It is about knowing your principles, the values you refuse to compromise, the vision that drives you, and the standard you uphold. Without this clarity, you risk becoming a chameleon, shaping yourself to fit into someone else's world, bending to his desires, shrinking your own voice in order to be accepted. That is how identity is lost. That is how people wake up years later realizing they became someone they never intended to be. When you know who you are, you stand with unshakable confidence. You walk into every situation not needing to prove your worth, but embodying it. People can sense it in your presence. They can feel it in your tone, in your actions, in the way you carry yourself. This is why self-knowledge is so powerful. It silently demands respect without uttering a word. Others may question your decisions, but they cannot question your certainty. Others may doubt your path, but they cannot deny your direction. Certainty is magnetic, and it only comes from knowing yourself deeply. Now, consider what happens when you focus on him before focusing on yourself. If you don't know who you are, you may judge him inaccurately. You may project your insecurities onto him, expecting him to fill gaps that only you can fill. You may elevate him to a pedestal he doesn't deserve, not because he is extraordinary, but because you feel ordinary. Or you may tolerate behaviors that dishonor you, not because he is powerful, but because you feel powerless. In every scenario, the issue is not who he is, it is who you are not yet willing to become. Self-knowledge acts as a shield. It protects you from manipulation. When you know your worth, flattery cannot blind you. When you know your values, temptation cannot sway you. When you know your direction, distraction cannot delay you. People who lack self-awareness are easy to control because they are always searching for definition from the outside. But people who know themselves cannot be controlled because their definition is already complete. They are not looking for someone else to crown them. They have already crowned themselves. Before asking who he is, ask yourself, what are my non-negotiables? What will I never compromise, regardless of circumstance? These are not just preferences, they are the pillars of your character. A person who knows these things cannot be easily deceived. They can look at someone's actions, someone's choices, someone's words, and quickly discern whether alignment exists. This prevents wasted time, wasted energy, and wasted years. Without these answers, you will always be tempted to mold yourself into what he desires rather than standing firmly in what you deserve. Another truth is that when you know who you are, you elevate the type of people who enter your life. People are drawn to clarity. When you have standards, you attract those who respect them. When you have vision, you attract those who align with it. When you have strength, you attract those who value it. But when you lack these things, you invite chaos. You open the door to people who see your uncertainty as an opportunity to dominate or diminish you. Life is not about what you tolerate, it is about what you invite. And what you invite is determined by who you believe you are. Knowing yourself also prevents desperation. Desperation is the enemy of dignity. When you do not know yourself, you cling to anyone who gives you attention. You confuse validation with love, control with care, possession with protection. But when you are secure in yourself, you no longer operate from scarcity. You do not beg to be chosen, you choose. You do not plead for respect, you command it. You do not lower your standards to be accepted. You raise your life so only the worthy can meet you there. This keynote is not about ignoring others. It is about prioritizing yourself. Because once you know yourself, asking who he is becomes easier. You are not blinded by charm or status. You are not overwhelmed by appearances. You can see clearly because you are not searching for yourself in him. You already have yourself. You are simply evaluating whether he aligns with the truth you have already embraced. This clarity eliminates confusion. It removes the fear of rejection. Because rejection is not personal when you already accept yourself, it removes the temptation to settle. Because settling is impossible when you know your value. The truth is simple: if you do not know who you are, you will always risk losing yourself in who he is. You will bend, you will shrink, you will compromise until you no longer recognize the person in the mirror. But when you know who you are, you never disappear. You never vanish in someone else's shadow. Instead, you stand tall, you stand firm, and you stand undeniable. And from that position of strength, you do not just ask who he is, you decide whether who he is deserves to stand beside who you already are. There is a dangerous pattern in life. People rush to measure the worth of others before they have measured their own. They examine his achievements, his words, his background, his appearance, his promises, but they have not examined themselves with the same intensity. They want to know his character while ignoring their own. They want to know his standards while living without any. They want to know his direction while wandering without clarity. This is why so many people find themselves lost in disappointment, trapped in unbalanced relationships, or chasing validation from people who were never worthy of their time in the first place. The truth is this: before you can ever ask who he is, you must first know who you are. Knowing who you are is the foundation for every decision you will make. Without that foundation, you will be tossed back and forth by opinions, circumstances, and relationships. You will attach your identity to what others think of you instead of grounding it in what you think of yourself. This is why people tolerate disrespect, why they stay in situations that diminish them, and why they settle for less than they deserve. It is not because the other person is so powerful, it is because they have not yet anchored themselves in their own identity. When you know who you are, you walk differently. You carry yourself with a quiet strength that does not need to be announced. Your presence speaks before your words ever do. People can sense the difference between someone who is pretending to be confident and someone who has built confidence through clarity. Pretenders rely on external approval, but the authentic know themselves deeply and need no applause. That authenticity commands respect without asking for it. If you do not know yourself, you will search for completion in him. You will hope that his presence defines you, that his attention validates you, that his approval secures you. But no person can carry the weight of being your identity. That is a burden only you can shoulder. When you place that responsibility on someone else, you will always be disappointed because you have asked him to fill a void that only self-awareness can fill. And the tragedy is that in the process of trying to hold on to him, you will lose yourself. Knowing who you are means knowing your boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are definitions of dignity. They tell others how you expect to be treated, and they protect you from being diminished. Without them, you invite chaos. You allow anyone with charm or persistence to cross lines that should never be crossed. But when you know your worth, you set clear boundaries that no one can violate without consequence. This is how you separate those who are worthy of your time from those who are not. Self-knowledge also sharpens your vision. It allows you to see him clearly without the fog of desperation or insecurity. When you know yourself, you are not blinded by superficial qualities. You are not swayed by empty promises. You are not impressed by appearances alone. You measure him against your values, your mission, and your standards. This makes your judgment sharper, your choices wiser, and your path clearer. Without this vision, you risk being led astray by illusions. Another truth is that people mirror what you project. If you project uncertainty, you invite manipulation. If you project desperation, you invite exploitation. If you project clarity, you invite respect. When you know yourself, your energy communicates that you cannot be deceived, cannot be controlled, and cannot be treated as ordinary. This does not require aggression or arrogance. It simply requires the confidence that comes from authenticity. Ask yourself, what are my values? What do I stand for, no matter what? What do I want my future to look like? What will I no longer accept in my life? These questions are not optional. They are necessary. Without answers, you will always bend to someone else's will. With answers, you become immovable. And once you are immovable, no person, no circumstance, no rejection can derail your identity. When you know who you are, you stop living in reaction to him. His actions do not control your emotions. His approval does not dictate your worth. His presence does not determine your direction. You stand complete in yourself. And from that position, you can choose not out of need, but out of strength. You can choose who deserves to walk beside you, not because you are desperate for company, but because you are already whole. That choice is power. That choice is freedom. The danger of not knowing yourself is that you will always accept less than you deserve. You will rationalize disrespect. You will tolerate neglect. You will excuse betrayal. You will do this not because you enjoy pain, but because you have not yet decided what you are truly worth. Once you decide, once you know, once you embrace your own identity fully, you will never again settle for anything beneath it. So before you ask who he is, pause and ask yourself, who am I? Do I know my mission? Do I know my values? Do I know my non-negotiables? Do I know my worth? Because once you answer these questions with clarity, the rest becomes simple. You will no longer wonder whether he respects you because you will only allow those who do. You will no longer ask whether he is worthy because your standards will reveal the truth. You will no longer fear being alone because you have already found yourself.